The black ships came through space like tears in the darkness. Captain Sarah Chun watched from the bridge of her diplomatic vessel as the Zilithian fleet appeared one by one through the jump gates. 200 ships, each one carved from what looked like glass, each one carrying the weight of grief that could be felt even across the vacuum of space. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Torres beside her. "I've never seen so many Zilithian ships in one place." Sarah had. Once, during the border wars 15 years ago. Back then, the crystalline aliens had come for conquest. Today, they came for something far more dangerous. They came to mourn. The lead ship was massive, easily 3 times the size of Sarah's vessel. Its surface rippled with patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. Those patterns were the Zilithian version of tears. She knew. Crystalline beings didn't cry water. They cried light. "Captain Chun," came a voice from the communication station. "The Zilithians are requesting permission to approach Arcturus 7. They want to begin their ritual." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Arcturus 7 was where it had happened. The mining accident that killed both human and Zilithian workers in the same cave-in. The accident that had brought the galaxy to the edge of war, and now brought the largest Zilithian fleet ever assembled to perform their most sacred ritual. "Tell them." Sarah paused. Her orders had been clear. Protect human interests. Keep the peace. Don't let this turn into the war everyone feared was coming. Tell them they have permission to approach the outer system, but they need to coordinate with our people on the surface. The communications officer nodded and began transmitting. Sarah turned back to the view screen, watching as the black ships began their slow approach to the mining moon where a child had died. Kethva had been young for a Zilithian, only about 50 Earth years old. In human terms, that made her barely a teenager. She had been learning the mining trade from her elders when the tunnel collapsed. 3 humans had died with her, including Maria Santos. The 12-year-old daughter of mining foreman Marcus Torres. Sarah had read the reports. It hadn't been anyone's fault. Just bad luck, unstable rock, and the cruel randomness of the universe. But try explaining that to 2 species who have been fighting over mineral rights for the past decade. "Captain," came another voice from behind her. "Admiral Harrison on Priority Channel." Sarah sighed and moved to her private communication station. Admiral Harrison's weathered face appeared on the screen, looking every bit as tired as Sarah felt. "Captain Chun, what's the situation?" 200 Zilithian ships requesting access to the Arcturus system for their morning ritual. They want to perform it on the surface where their child died. Harrison rubbed his temples. "And our colonists?" "Still on the surface. About 3,000 miners and their families. They're scared, Admiral. Some want to evacuate. Others are refusing to leave their homes. The Galactic Council is breathing down my neck on this one. Chun, they think this could be the spark that starts the war we've all been trying to avoid. The Zilithians have never performed their death ritual with outsiders present." Sarah knew the history. When Zilithians grieved, they wanted complete isolation. They would typically claim entire star systems for their mourning periods, driving out any other life forms. It was part of their culture, as natural to them as breathing. But Arcturus 7 was a human colony world. "What are my orders, sir?" "Keep the peace. Find a way to make this work. The galaxy is watching, and if this goes bad..." Harrison didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what a war between humans and Zilithians would look like. The screen went dark, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She walked back to the main view screen, where the Zilithian fleet was now clearly visible. The ships moved in perfect formation, their crystalline hulls catching and reflecting the light of the system star. "Captain," Lieutenant Torres said quietly, "I'm getting reports from the surface. The colonists are. Well, they're not evacuating." "What do you mean?" "Marcus Torres is organizing them. He says they're not going to run from their grief." Torres paused. "Ma'am, his daughter was one of the humans who died in that tunnel." Sarah closed her eyes. Marcus Torres was the mining foreman, the man who had been leading the operation when the tunnel collapsed. He had lost his own child in the same accident that killed the Zilithian youngster. If anyone had a right to grieve, it was him. Any word from the Zilithians about what they need for their ritual? They're asking for silence across the entire moon. Complete isolation for what they call a Shalthani. It's supposed to last for 7 standard days. 7 days. Sarah did the math in her head. 7 days of Zilithian morning songs that could shatter crystal at close range. 7 days of ritual that no outsider had ever witnessed. 7 days during which anything could go wrong and start the war that would tear the galaxy apart. "Open a channel to the Zilithian fleet," she ordered. "Channel open. Captain, this is Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth vessel Empathy's Edge, to the Zilithian fleet. We acknowledge your loss and your need to honor your dead. We request dialogue about how we can accommodate your sacred ritual while protecting all life in this system." The response came quickly, carried on harmonics that made the ship's hull vibrate. When translated by the ship's computer, the voice sounded ancient and filled with sorrow. "Human vessel, we come to sing our child home to the crystal gardens of eternity. We require solitude for the Shalthani. All other life must withdraw beyond the moon's gravity well." Sarah felt her heart sink. The moon's gravity well extended well beyond the planet's surface. The Zilithians were asking for complete evacuation of the system. "Zilithian fleet, we understand your needs. However, there are 3,000 human civilians on the surface who also lost friends and family in the same tragedy that took your child. They wish to honor their dead as well." A long silence followed. Sarah could almost feel the confusion radiating from the alien ships. In their culture, grief was private, sacred, something to be experienced alone or only with others of their kind. "Human captain, your dead are not our dead. Your grief is not our grief. Withdraw your people." Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment everything could go wrong. But she had to try. "Respectfully, Zilithian fleet, our dead died together. Our children played together in the tunnels during their rest periods. Maria Santos and Kethva were friends. Perhaps they should be mourned together." Another long silence. Then, finally, a response that would change everything. "Human captain, you speak of things that have never been. We will consider. But know this. If your people interfere with the Shalthani, if they disturb our sacred grief, there will be consequences." The channel closed. Sarah stared at the view screen, watching the black ships continue their approach to the moon where 2 children had died together. She had bought them time, but she wasn't sure for what. All she knew was that down on the surface, Marcus Torres was gathering his people, preparing to do something that had never been done before. The galaxy held its breath and waited. The Zilithian ships landed like falling stars. Marcus Torres watched from the ridge overlooking the mining compound as the crystalline vessels touched down in perfect silence around the collapsed tunnel where his daughter had died. Each ship was beautiful in its own terrible way, carved from what looked like black diamond and humming with internal light. "They're not what I expected," said Jenny Walsh, standing beside him. She was the colony's teacher, and she had known Maria well. "They're so sad." Marcus nodded. He could feel it too, a weight in the air that pressed down on everything. The Zilithians hadn't even begun their ritual yet, but their grief was already changing the world around them. The very rocks seemed to absorb their sorrow. Behind them, nearly 1,000 colonists had gathered on the ridge. They had come despite the evacuation orders, despite the fear, despite everything their common sense told them about staying away from grieving aliens who could level mountains with their songs. "Papa," whispered Elena Torres, Marcus's surviving daughter. She was only 8, but she understood death better than most adults after losing her sister. Are they here for Maria too? Marcus knelt down to Elena's level. They're here for their little girl, sweetheart. But Maria was her friend. Below them, the Zilithian ships opened without sound. The beings that emerged were unlike anything most of the colonists had ever seen in person. They were tall, easily 7 feet, and their bodies were made of living crystal that shifted between transparent and opaque. In the light of the setting sun, they looked like walking rainbows. The lead Zilithian carried something in her arms. Even from a distance, Marcus could see it was small, fragile, precious. A crystal formation that pulsed with faint light. That's her, Jenny whispered. That's HFY. The Zilithians had recovered their child's crystalline core from the collapsed tunnel. It was all that remained of a young life cut short by falling rock and bad timing. But Marcus knew that in Zilithian culture, the core contained everything important about a person. Their memories, their hopes, their essence thought, just like the small wooden box Marcus carried, contained everything important about Maria. Her drawings, her favorite hair ribbon, the fossil she had found just days before the accident. The Zilithians began to move toward the tunnel entrance. Their leader, a being whose crystal body showed veins of deep blue, started to sing. The sound was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard. It wasn't music as humans understood it, but something deeper. A harmonic that seemed to come from the planet itself. Other Zilithians joined the song. The sound grew, building layers of meaning that human ears couldn't fully process. Marcus felt it in his bones, in his heart, in the places where his own grief lived. It was beautiful and terrible and completely alien. "Sir," said Tom Bradley, one of the senior miners, "maybe we should head back. This feels too private." Marcus almost agreed. Everything about this felt sacred, untouchable, not meant for human eyes. The Zilithians moved in patterns around the tunnel entrance, their songs growing more complex. Their crystalline bodies began to glow brighter, synchronized with their morning melody. But then Marcus saw something that changed everything. The lead Zilithian, the one carrying HFY's core, stumbled. Just for a moment. Just long enough to show that beneath all the alien beauty and ritual, she was a mother who had lost her child. That stumble looked exactly like the way Marcus had stumbled when he carried Maria's coffin. "No," Marcus said quietly. "We're not leaving." He started walking down the ridge toward the Zilithians. Behind him, he heard Elena call out and the sound of footsteps as other colonists followed. He didn't look back. His eyes were fixed on the grieving aliens below. The Zilithians noticed his approach immediately. Their song faltered, confusion rippling through their ranks. Several of the warriors among them shifted into defensive positions, their bodies hardening and sharpening. The lead mourner, the one Marcus now knew was HFY's mother, turned to face him with eyes like blue starlight. Marcus stopped just outside the circle of Zilithian ships. Close enough to be heard, far enough to show respect. He could feel the weight of 2 species watching him, waiting to see what would happen next. "My name is Marcus Torres," he called out in the simplified trade language most galactic species understood. "My daughter died in that tunnel with yours." The Zilithian mother's crystalline face shifted, expressions flowing across her features like light through water. When she spoke, her voice carried the harmonics of her people, but shaped into words humans could understand. "I am Yilthara, keeper of grief for the crystal ship Eternal Resonance. Your young one was called Maria Santos." Marcus blinked back tears. The alien had pronounced his daughter's name perfectly, with care and respect. "Yes, Maria Santos." Yilthara looked at the small wooden box in Marcus's hands. "You carry her essence?" "I carry her memory. Then you understand the weight of loss." Marcus nodded. Around him, more colonists were gathering. Jenny Walsh with a photo of her students. Tom Bradley with his brother's mining helmet, Elena Torres with Maria's stuffed rabbit, all of them carrying pieces of the people they had lost. The other Zilithians watched in fascination and growing alarm. This had never happened before. Their mourning rituals were sacred, private, meant only for their own kind. But here were aliens, the very people they had expected to flee, approaching with their own symbols of grief. "Your people disturbed the Shalthani," said one of the warrior Zilithians, his body flashing warning colors. "They must withdraw." But Yilthara held up a hand, silencing him. She studied Marcus and the growing crowd of humans with something that might have been curiosity. "Human Marcus Torres, why do you come here? This is not your ritual." Marcus thought about that question. Why had he come? Because he was angry at the universe for taking his daughter. Because he couldn't stand the thought of anyone grieving alone. Because Maria had talked about her crystal friend and he wanted to honor that friendship. Because they were children, he said finally. And children shouldn't die alone, and they shouldn't be mourned alone. Something changed in Yilthara's crystalline features. A softening, perhaps. Or maybe just recognition of a truth that crossed species lines. "You wish to grieve alongside us? I wish to grieve for them both." Yilthara looked at the other humans, then back at the collapsed tunnel where two children had played and laughed and died together. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note Marcus had never heard from a Zilithian before: uncertainty. "This has never been done. We do not know what will happen if alien grief mingles with our own." Marcus stepped forward. Behind him, Elena took his hand. Jenny Walsh moved to his other side. One by one, the colonists formed a loose line facing the Zilithian mourners. "Neither do we," Marcus said. "But maybe it's time to find out." Yilthara stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she began to sing again. But this time, her song was different. Simpler, maybe. Or maybe just more open to possibilities. Marcus listened to the alien melody, feeling its grief and beauty wash over him. And then, without really planning it, he began to sing too. Not in harmony with the Zilithians, but alongside them. A lullaby he used to sing to Maria when she was small. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird." His voice was rough with emotion and completely human. It should have clashed with the crystal harmonics of the Zilithians. It should have ruined their sacred ritual. Instead, something impossible happened. The two songs found each other across the gap between species, creating something new. Not fusion, but conversation. Grief talking to grief in different languages, but the same heart. Other humans joined Marcus. Elena hummed along with his lullaby. Jenny recited a poem about loss. Tom simply said his brother's name over and over, like a prayer. And the Zilithians, after moments of shocked silence, began to adjust their harmonics. Not to match the humans, but to make space for them. To let human grief exist alongside their own without drowning it out. For the first time in galactic history, two species mourned together. Different, but together. And in that moment, everything began to change. Captain Sarah Chun had seen many strange things in her years of diplomatic service. But nothing like what was happening on the surface of Arcturus 7. Her ship's sensors were picking up something impossible. Two completely different grief patterns somehow existing in the same space without destroying each other. "Captain," Lieutenant Torres called from the sensor station. "The harmonic readings are off the charts. The Zilithians are actually adjusting their ritual frequency to accommodate human vocal patterns." Sarah studied the readouts in amazement. Zilithian mourning songs typically operated at frequencies that could shatter most materials. They were designed to be performed alone, in perfect harmonic unity. But according to her instruments, they were somehow making room for human voices. "Get me Admiral Harrison," she ordered. "He needs to see this." On the surface, Marcus Torres felt the change before he understood it. The alien harmonics that had pressed against his human song were shifting, becoming something more welcoming. Not changing to match him, but changing to include him, around him. Other colonists were finding their own ways to honor the dead. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who ran the colony's medical clinic, was telling stories about the children she had treated. Her voice carried across the mining site, speaking of scraped knees healed and fevers broken, of small lives touched and remembered. Young Tommy Chun, no relation to the captain, played a wooden flute his grandfather had carved. The melody was simple and human, nothing like the complex crystal harmonics of the Zilithians, but it wove itself into their song like a thread of silver through a tapestry of light. Elena Torres had moved closer to the Zilithian children. Yes, children. Marcus was amazed to realize that some of the smaller crystalline beings were youngsters, brought to learn about grief and loss. They watched Elena with the same curiosity that she watched them. Two different kinds of childhood, recognizing each other across the species divide. But it was Yilthara who made the breakthrough. The Zilithian mother approached Marcus while he sang his lullaby, carrying her daughter's crystal core like the most precious thing in the universe, which Marcus supposed it was. Human father, she said in her harmonically layered voice. Your song, it speaks of protection, of love that watches over the young. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face as he sang the same lullaby he had sung to Maria every night. Our songs speak of guidance, Yilthara continued, of light to lead young souls to the crystal gardens where they can grow without fear. She paused, studying Marcus with those impossible blue eyes. Perhaps all parents sing the same song in different languages. That's when it happened. The moment that would be studied by xenologists for generations to come. Yilthara began to sing, but not in the formal harmonics of Zilithian ritual. She sang something simpler, more personal. A lullaby of her own, meant for one small crystal child who would never grow up. Marcus found himself listening, really listening to the alien melody. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. Love, protection, the desperate hope that somehow, beyond death, their children would be safe and happy. Without thinking, he began to hum along, not matching her melody but harmonizing with it, the way he and his wife used to harmonize when they sang together. The way families sing together. Other humans heard it and began to join in their own ways. Jenny Walsh started speaking the names of all her students, including the ones she had lost. Tom Bradley told stories of his brother's bravery in the mines. Mrs. Patterson shared memories of Maria's last checkup, how the girl had been so excited about her new crystal friend. And the Zilithians, amazed by what they were witnessing, began to respond in kind. They shared their own memories of Kethva, how she had loved to explore new tunnels, how she had been fascinated by the strange human children who played such different games, but laughed in the same way. Dr. Velthani, one of the younger Zilithians, made a discovery that sent ripples through both groups. She had been analyzing the harmonic patterns created by the mixed human and Zilithian voices, and what she found defied everything she knew about acoustic science. Yilthara, she called, her crystalline form flashing with excitement and confusion. The frequency patterns, they're creating resonance bridges. The human and Zilithian grief harmonics are actually reinforcing each other. This was theoretically impossible. Zilithian harmonics operated on precise mathematical principles that required exact frequency matching. Human voices were chaotic, imprecise, full of emotional variations that should have disrupted any ordered pattern. But instead of disruption, they were creating something new. A type of harmony that neither species had known was possible. Yilthara studied the readings on Velthani's scanner, then looked back at the mixed group of mourners. Humans and Zilithians were now intermingled, not following any formal pattern, but somehow, naturally finding places where their different ways of grieving supported each other. It's because we're not trying to be the same, she realized, a voice filled with wonder. We're just trying to be together. Marcus heard her words and nodded. That was exactly right. The humans hadn't tried to copy Zilithian rituals, and the Zilithians hadn't tried to sing human songs. Instead, they had found a way to grieve side by side, each in their own way, but not alone. Elena Torres had somehow ended up standing next to a young Zilithian named Crivel. Neither could speak the other's language, but they both understood loss. Elena showed Crivel her sister's favorite fossil, and the young Zilithian responded by making her crystalline fingers glow in patterns that somehow conveyed her own memories of playing with HFY. They were friends, Elena said softly. And somehow Crivel understood. The young Zilithian's glow shifted to warmer colors, and she began to sing something soft and sad and beautiful. Elena hummed along, not matching the melody, but adding her own small voice to the mixed dot as the day wore on. Something unprecedented began to happen. The formal structure of the Zilithian morning ritual started to change, incorporating human elements not through imitation, but through acknowledgement. When humans spoke of their memories, the Zilithians would respond with harmonics that honored those memories. When Zilithians shared their ritual songs, humans would listen respectfully and add their own quiet voices where appropriate. For the first time in anyone's memory, a Zilithian Shalfani became something shared, not diluted or diminished, but expanded, made larger by the presence of others who understood loss. Yulthara performed the ritual of crystal placement, setting HFY's core into a specially prepared chamber in the tunnel where she had died. But before she sealed the chamber, Marcus approached with his wooden box. "May I?" he asked quietly. Yulthara looked at the simple human container, then at Marcus's tear-streaked face. "Your daughter's essence belongs with your people." "Some of it," Marcus agreed. "But some of it belongs here, where she played with her friend." He pulled out one of Maria's drawings. It was simple, as children's art always is, but it showed two stick figures holding hands. One was clearly human, with yellow hair and a big smile. The other was tall and sparkly, with stars for eyes. She drew this after her first day working in the tunnels with HFY. She was so excited to have a crystal friend. Yulthara stared at the drawing for a long moment. In it, she could see her own daughter as Maria had seen her, not as an alien, not as something frightening or strange, but simply as a friend. "Yes," she said finally. "Their essences should be together." Marcus placed the drawing next to HFY's crystal core. As he did, he felt something shift inside him. Not healing, exactly, but something like peace. Maria hadn't died alone. She had died with her friend, and now they would be remembered together. The final moments of the ritual were unlike anything in Zilithian history. As Yulthara sealed the memorial chamber, both species sang together. Not the same song, but songs that complemented each other. Songs that spoke of love and loss and the hope that somewhere beyond the stars. Two little girls were playing together again. When it was over, when the last notes had faded into the evening air, Yulthara turned to Marcus with tears of light streaming down her crystal face. "Human father," she said, "we have done something that was not done before. We have grieved together." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. Around them, humans and Zilithians stood in small mixed groups, still processing what had happened. They had come together as strangers and enemies. They were leaving as something new, something that might just change everything, in orbit above. Captain Chun watched the readings from the surface and tried to comprehend what she was seeing. Somehow, in defiance of all expectations, two species had found a way to honor their dead together. And in doing so, They had created something that had never existed before in the galaxy. They had created hope. The news spread through the galaxy faster than light could travel, carried by quantum communication networks and the excited chatter of merchants and diplomats. What happened on Arcturus 7 was impossible, unprecedented, and completely undeniable. For the first time in recorded history, two species had successfully shared a grief ritual. Ambassador Kextai of the Rigel Trade Coalition was the first to understand the implications. She was reviewing the reports in her office on the neutral station Haven's Rest when her aide, a nervous centauri named Bylix, brought her the footage. "Madam Ambassador, you need to see this. The humans and Zilithians, they actually sang together during the Shalthani." Kextai watched the recording in stunned silence. Her own species, the Rigelians, had been trying to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Zilithians for over 2 centuries, always being told that their emotions were too chaotic for proper communication. Yet here were humans, the most emotionally volatile species in known space, somehow harmonizing with Zilithian grief songs. "Get me a communication channel to every member of the coalition," she ordered. "And send a copy of this to the Thraxian Empire, the Veilter Nomad Fleet, and the Depsinger Collective. They need to see what's possible." Captain Sarah Chun found herself at the center of a diplomatic storm. Her ship's communication arrays were overwhelmed with requests from species across the galaxy, all wanting to know more about what the news networks were calling the Duet of Sorrows. The Thraxian Empire, rigid in their military traditions, sent a formal inquiry about the tactical applications of shared emotional expression. The aquatic depth singers transmitted a complex harmonic pattern that their translators couldn't decipher, but which somehow conveyed intense curiosity. Most surprisingly, the nomadic Veilter sent their first communication to human space in over 50 years. "Captain," Lieutenant Torres reported, "we're getting a request from the Galactic Council. They want you and Marcus Torres to address an emergency session." Sarah rubbed her temples. She was a ship captain, not a diplomat. But she was also the closest thing to an expert the galaxy had on what was being called the human protocol. On Arcturus 7, Marcus Torres was discovering that being the first human to successfully grieve alongside aliens came with unexpected responsibilities. Delegations from a dozen species were requesting meetings, all wanting to understand how he had managed to bridge such a fundamental cultural divide. The first to arrive were the Korath, a species known for their logical approach to everything, including death. They treated mortality as a data point, something to be recorded and filed away without emotion. Their representative, a tall being with silver skin and completely black eyes, observed the memorial site with obvious confusion. "Human Taurus," she said through her translator device. "We do not understand the function of this activity. The deceased cannot benefit from these actions." Marcus was cleaning dirt from Maria's memorial marker, a simple stone he had placed next to the crystal chamber where Kethva rested. He looked up at the Korath diplomat and thought about how to explain. "It's not for the dead," he said finally. "It's for the living. It's how we learn to carry on without them." The Korath representative processed this for several moments. "This creates emotional bonds that transcend species barriers?" "It creates understanding," Marcus replied. "When you see someone else's pain and recognize it as the same as your own, it's harder to see them as an enemy." That conversation, recorded and transmitted across the galaxy, became the foundation for what xenosociologists would later call the Torres Principle. Shared grief creates shared empathy. The response was immediate and widespread. The Veilter, who had avoided all contact during their migration seasons because they coincided with their death rituals, sent an unprecedented message to the human colony. They wanted to learn more about grief that builds rather than isolates. The Depth Singers, whose underwater cities made direct contact nearly impossible, transmitted a series of songs that seemed to be questions about human mourning practices. When human linguists finally deciphered the harmonics, they found complex inquiries about whether humans might be willing to witness their deepest death songs. Even the warlike Kryn Empire, which had been threatening human border worlds for decades, went quiet. Their silence lasted for weeks before they sent a single, stark message. The Kryn do not understand this weakness that creates strength. But it was the response from the Zilithian home worlds that truly changed everything. The High Crystal Council, the governing body of the Zilithian species, made an announcement that shocked the galaxy. They declared Arcturus 7 to be a Kethethani site, a place of universal mourning where all species could come to honor their dead. More importantly, they established the first interspecies grief protocol. Any species that had lost members in conflicts with other species could request a joint mourning ritual, with Zilithian grief keepers serving as mediators. The first test came sooner than anyone expected. The mining rights dispute that had originally caused tension between humans and Zilithians was just one of dozens of similar conflicts across the galaxy. 3 weeks after the events on Arcturus 7, another accident occurred in the Vega system, where Rigelian and Thraxian work crews had been feuding over asteroid mining rights when a solar flare damaged both cruise ships, leaving 12 dead from both species. The families of the deceased made an unprecedented request. They wanted to hold a joint memorial service using the new protocol. The Thraxian Empire, militaristic and proud, initially refused. Their dead were to be honored in traditional warrior ceremonies, not in some soft alien ritual. But the families persisted, and eventually, the Empire agreed to allow human mediators to oversee the process. Captain Sarah Chun found herself traveling to the Vega system with a small team of grief counselors and Marcus Torres, who had become the galaxy's first interspecies mourning specialist. She had no idea what she was doing, but she was determined to try. The Rigelians approached the ceremony with their typical analytical precision, documenting every aspect of the process for future study. The Thraxians came in full battle armor, treating the memorial like a military funeral. At first, it seemed impossible that these two approaches could coexist, but Marcus had learned something important on Arcturus 7. He didn't try to make the species mourn the same way. Instead, he created space for them to mourn together. The Rigelians shared precise biographies of each lost crew member, detailed records of their contributions and achievements. The Thraxians performed their war chants, honoring their dead as fallen warriors. And somehow, in the space between logic and passion, between documentation and ritual, the two species found common ground in their shared loss. The ceremony lasted 3 days and was broadcast across the galaxy. By the end, Rigelian researchers were comparing notes with Thraxian warriors about the effectiveness of different mourning practices. More importantly, both species agreed to joint safety protocols for future mining operations. Word of the success reached the Galactic Council just as they were debating new policies for interspecies conflict resolution. For the first time in the Council's history, they voted to establish a Department of Shared Grief, with funding for grief counselors to be stationed at conflict zones throughout the galaxy. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations, capable of faster-than-light travel and planet-shaping technology, were learning about peace from something as basic and universal as sadness. But perhaps that was exactly what made it work. Every species in the galaxy knew loss. Every civilization had ways of honoring their dead. And every sentient being understood the pain of losing someone they loved. The humans hadn't invented grief. They had simply shown that it could be shared across the stars, that mourning together was stronger than mourning alone. And in doing so, they had given the galaxy something it had never had before: a way to build bridges from the very thing that had always divided them. The ripples continued to spread. On a dozen worlds, former enemies were experimenting with joint memorial services. In the halls of the Galactic Council, diplomats spoke of grief diplomacy as seriously as they discussed trade agreements and territorial boundaries. And somewhere in the quantum foam between dimensions, two little girls, one human and one crystalline, were playing together in a place where death was just another word for transformation. And friendship transcended the boundaries between species, between life and death, between what was and what could be. The galaxy was learning to grieve. And in learning to grieve together, it was learning how to heal. 5 years after the Duet of Sorrows, Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of Haven's Rest and marveled at how much the galaxy had changed. The space station, once a simple waypoint for traders and diplomats, had been transformed into something unprecedented. The first interspecies memorial dot ships from across the galaxy docked here now, bringing beings who had come to honor their dead in the company of others who understood loss. The station's central hub had been converted into the Hall of Shared Sorrow, where beings of any species could mourn according to their traditions while being witnessed and supported by others. Admiral Chun, came a familiar voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Marcus Torres approaching, though his title was different now. The simple mining foreman had become the galaxy's first director of interspecies grief services, a position that hadn't existed before his daughter's death changed everything. "Marcus," she smiled. "How did the Andromedan delegation respond to the memorial protocols?" Marcus's weathered face showed both exhaustion and satisfaction. "Better than we hoped. They've been isolating themselves for generations because their death rituals involve intense electromagnetic pulses that can damage other species' equipment. But the Regilians developed shielding technology so they could observe safely. And the Corthony Choir provided harmonic accompaniment that somehow complemented the Andromedan energy patterns." Sarah shook her head in amazement. "I still can't believe how this all started. A mining accident and a grieving father who refused to let aliens mourn alone." "It wasn't me," Marcus said quietly, the way he always did when people gave him credit. "It was Elena. She saw Kryval crying and wanted to help. Everything else just followed." Elena Torres was 15 now, and she had become something unique in galactic history, the first native interspecies grief counselor. She had grown up in a galaxy where mourning together was normal, where children from different species played together at memorial services, where loss was shared rather than hidden. Her generation didn't see anything strange about comforting a Silithian child or helping a Thraxian warrior process the death of a battlemate. Through the viewport, Sarah could see the latest addition to the memorial station, a vast crystalline garden where the Zilithians had created permanent memorial spaces for the dead of all species. The garden grew with each passing month as more civilizations contributed their own memorial traditions to the shared space. The Depth Singers had created an underwater memorial chamber where their songs could echo through liquid medium. The Valter had contributed a zero-gravity space where their energy being dead could be released into the cosmic wind. The warlike Kryn had built a hall of battle honors where warriors from any species could be remembered for their courage. But it was the human section that still drew the most visitors. Simple stone markers, each with a name and a few words about the person remembered. Nothing fancy, nothing technological. Just the basic human need to say, "This person mattered. This person was loved. This person is missed." "Admiral," Lieutenant Martinez called from the communication station. "We're receiving a priority message from the Galactic Council. The Hegemony War has ended." Sarah felt her breath catch. The Hegemony War had been raging for 3 years, a brutal conflict between the Outer Rim Hegemony and the Core World Alliance. Millions had died, entire systems had been devastated, and peace talks had failed repeatedly. What changed? She asked. Martinez looked up from his console, wonder clear in his voice. The families of the war dead. Both sides. They requested joint memorial services for their lost soldiers. When the military leaders attended the ceremonies, he paused, consulting his notes. According to the report, General Vextar of the hegemony began crying during a human lullaby sung for a Corps world soldier who had been the same age as his own dead son. The ceasefire was declared 2 hours later. Marcus smiled sadly. Grief diplomacy strikes again. It had become the galaxy's most effective tool for ending conflicts. When species fought, diplomats would invite the families of the dead to share their mourning. It was harder to hate someone when you had seen them cry for their children. Harder to dehumanize an enemy when you had heard their lullabies and prayers. The Memorial Guard, Marcus's organization of humans specially trained in supporting other species through grief, had become one of the most respected institutions in the galaxy. They didn't try to fix anyone or change their mourning practices. They simply witnessed, shared their own losses, and reminded grieving beings that they weren't alone in the universe. Speaking of the Guard, Marcus said, we've received an interesting request. The Void Walkers want to establish contact. Sarah's eyes widened. The Void Walkers were one of the oldest known species, beings of pure energy who existed in the spaces between stars. They had never made contact with any physical species before, considering themselves too different for meaningful communication. What changed their minds? They've been observing the memorial services, Marcus explained. Apparently, they've been trying to communicate with the spirits of their dead for millennia, and they think human grief techniques might help them make contact. They want to learn about mourning from physical beings. It was just the latest example of how the protocols developed on Arcturus 7 had spread beyond their original purpose. Species weren't just learning to mourn together. They were learning from each other's approaches to death, memory, and loss. The result was a flowering of new understandings about consciousness, mortality, and what it meant to exist. The Rigelians had developed new, mathematical models of emotional processing based on Zilithian grief harmonics. The Thraxians had incorporated human memorial traditions into their warrior training, teaching soldiers to honor their fallen comrades as individuals rather than just statistics. The aquatic depth singers had learned to modulate their death songs to comfort land-dwelling species, creating the first truly universal music. Admiral Chun, came another voice. Sarah turned to see Dr. Yilthara approaching, her crystalline form now showing veins of gold that indicated her elevated status among her people. The Zilithian, who had first agreed to let humans share her species' grief ritual, had become the galaxy's leading expert on interspecies emotional resonance. Yilthara, Sarah greeted her warmly. How is the new research going? Fascinating beyond all expectation, the Zilithian replied, her harmonics carrying notes of excitement. We've discovered that when species mourn together, they create what we call empathy cascades. The shared emotional resonance actually strengthens the neural pathways associated with cross-species understanding. Beings who have mourned together show measurably increased ability to cooperate and communicate. In simpler terms, grieving together literally rewired the brain to be more accepting of other species. It was as if the universe had built empathy into the very structure of consciousness, just waiting for someone to discover how to access it. Which brings me to why I'm here, Yilthara continued. The Galactic Council has approved funding for the Memorial Research Institute. We want to study not just grief, but all shared emotional experiences that might bridge species differences. Joy, wonder, hope, love? We think human emotional techniques could be the key to finally creating a truly unified galactic civilization. Sarah looked out at the ships in the docking bay. Representatives of dozens of species who had come here to honor their dead and learn from each other's sorrow. Some of them had been enemies when this all started. Now they were sharing their deepest pain and finding comfort in each other's presence. "It's remarkable," she said. 5 years ago, we were on the brink of war. Now we're talking about unified civilization." Marcus nodded. Maria would have loved this. She always believed in making friends with everyone. Through the viewport, Sarah could see a group of children playing in the memorial garden. Human children, Zilithian younglings, Rigelian juveniles, and Thraxian cubs all together, all comfortable with each other in a way their parents could barely imagine. This generation was growing up in a galaxy where species differences were just interesting variations rather than insurmountable barriers. Elena Torres was among them, now leading a memorial service for a Veilter energy being who had died in an accident. She moved between species with easy confidence, translating not just languages but emotional concepts, helping each group understand how the others processed loss. She was what the future looked like. "You know what the strangest part is?" Marcus said quietly. "We never actually solved the original problem. Humans and Zilithians are still arguing over mining rights. The difference is that now we're arguing like family." That was true. The conflicts hadn't disappeared, but they had fundamentally changed character. When species disagreed now, they did so with the knowledge that their opponents were capable of love, hope, and pain. It was much harder to dehumanize someone when you had shared their grief. The memorial station's bells began to chime, marking the beginning of another ceremony. Sarah could see beings from at least 8 different species gathering in the Hall of Shared Sorrow, preparing to honor their dead together. Some were recent losses, others were ancient griefs finally finding expression in the company of understanding strangers. "I should go," Marcus said.